we can, I'll just give it a minute or so. Just got one or two colleagues still joining us, so we just hang on a couple of minutes and then we'll get started on this presentation. So just bear with us, that will be appreciated. Yeah, I've still got colleagues logging on now. Yeah, we'll just give it a few more seconds, I think, and we did say we started at 1/4 past. Okay, I think what we'll do, we'll get started. So just some kind of housekeeping really at the beginning. Mark, I can see your screen. Just to some general housekeeping. As you know, this webinar is you're on mute, so you can't participate in the webinar. The way you participate in the webinar is by, please, on the right hand side of your screen, the questions box. If you could complete and pop any questions you have as we go through the webinar, then we can pick up those questions and respond to them. And hopefully, if we've got time at the end of the presentation, we'll be able to answer those questions verbally. Certainly, if not, then obviously we'll be able to respond back to you direct with those answers. I would sooner you put the questions in rather than assume that the question that you're thinking of asking may be answered in some slides forthcoming. Sooner pop it in, and then if we do cover it, well, great, happy days, so to speak. So please use that question box as we kind of go through. Now, I'm joined by several colleagues, and we are doing this from home, so hopefully there won't be any kind of external noises, dogs barking, etc. But you never know, and hopefully everything will work as it should do. So just as a kind of general introduction, so I'm Paul Brown. I'm a technical advisor at City and Guilds for the on-site, so for the construction aspects of the T-level. I'm joined by my colleague Rob Malinder, who's the technical advisor for building services. And we've also got Mark Jones, who's the EAL EQA manager. And we've also got another colleague from EAL, Bob Hassel, who's also who actually is an EQA as well. So there's 4 of us on the call. So hopefully we'll be able to respond to any kind of queries you may have. But just as a general introduction to this, so this is the first, if you like, of a series of about half a dozen webinars and Teams meetings for what we call in pre-delivery centres. So centres like yourself that are considering delivering the T-level in September 2023. So we're kind of taking the opportunity of this academic year to put a series of webinars and Teams meetings together so we can move you along the journey and prepare you for the actual T-level delivery in September 2023. And this happens to be a webinar, but we have got Teams meetings. Now, the Teams are good because it enables you to be able to kind of have that correspondence, that discussion with us direct. So there's about a 50-50 split between webinars and Teams. So we'll do this, like I said, throughout the year, and you'll be notified of the forthcoming events if you already don't know them, because we've set them all for the academic year so far. So if we always an anxious moment when you press the button and nothing happens. Try it again. There we go. So just to start, really, guys. So this is an introduction into T-level. So as you're aware, City and Guilds and EAL won the tender to be able to develop T-level qualifications in terms of the on-site and for the building services. However, we have to work within a structure, a T-level structure, which you can see on your screen in front of you. We couldn't change this, we just had to work within that envelope. So, for example, the T-level is typically over 2 years, approximately 1,800 hours, and you will see that they do vary between the on-site and the building services in terms of the GLH that have been allocated to them as we work through this development. And this development has been worked through both with providers, but particularly importantly with employers as well, because it all has to be signed off by the employers to say that they're happy with the content and the hours and so on and so forth. In order for the qualifications to be achieved, the learners need to achieve all elements, and you can see in front of you that there are several elements to a T-level qualification, and I'll kind of go through those briefly shortly. As I said, it's been developed in consultation with employers and with obviously other awarding organisations. Let's say we're working in partnership with AEL and City and Guilds. The Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education, of course, are involved in that as well, in order to sign off, if you like, the actual T-level content in terms of on-site and building services. So when you start looking at what we've got to work within, if you like, with a technical qualification, TQ, if people talk about, oh, it's a TQ, well, they're referring to the technical qualification, T-level aspect. So you've got, as I said, between 9 and 1400 hours. So there is a core component aspect. Now, that was construction and building services are what they call a Wave 2 T-level provider. There was a Wave 1, and as you probably know, for the construction and building environment, Pearson's won that tender and developed their particular professional qualification. But part of that was also developing a core. And now this core component is to go across all the kind of construction trade areas and building services areas. So quite a bit of that work was done, but we was able to, we had to work within that kind of envelope as such. So the core, and again, a bit more details about this later, but basically it is about the basic knowledge and understanding of theories and principles relevant to the broader construction and building services sector, if I put it that way. And it does consist of, there is an exam. In fact, there were 2 papers, but a little bit more about that later. And there was an employer set project as well, which is a scenario-based project, which the learner has to complete for the core component. But as I said, a little bit more about that later. So this is really just giving you an overview, an introduction at this stage. But then the other part of the equation is the occupational specialism. So this is effectively the practical, if you want to look at it that way. So this is where obviously the building services, you might do the plumbing, for construction you might do the carpentry and joinery route as such. So this is the practical aspect, but built in there, of course, there is a requirement for maths and English and digital skills. That's again part of the T-level envelope, if you like. And again, I'm going to touch on the occupational specialisms because you will see that there is a difference between on-site and building services engineering T-level. And then you have, as another component part of the T-level, you have this industry placement. It needs to be with an employer. It's a minimum of 45 days, between 315 and 420 hours. So that's quite a big ask, but nevertheless, this is what is the, if you like, the requirements for T-levels. And it's an opportunity for the students to develop their technical skills and apply what knowledge they have in a working environment effectively. There are some support for the learners in that provider can contribute towards travel and subsistence costs. The students effectively the employers not expected to pay. The employers don't pay the student a salary. Yeah, okay, they're providing the experience for that particular learner, but there is some help there. And then potentially in some sectors there are other requirements that may be required, which have been specified by the particular route, things like a license to practice. And then you've got, of course, the employability enrichment and pastoral requirements. So those kind of, I suppose you could look at it almost at 4 blocks of activity. Appreciate the bottom right one is split into 2. But you basically got those 4 blocks of activity, and the bits that City and Guilds and EAL are supporting and concentrating on specifically, and what the kind of winning of the tender was about, was the core component and the occupational specialism aspect. Clearly, we are going to support also on industrial placement and give guidance, where we can. But our main emphasis and main role here in the T-level is the core and the occupational specialism. So that's just a basic overview of the structure that we've had to work within in order to create the T-level for on-site and the T-level for building services. So how does the T-level compare? T-levels at level 3, as I'm sure you're all aware, and typically at level 3, then you've got your A-levels. I think most of you are very familiar with the A-level route, and then you've got this T-level. So typically, as I said before, over 2 years, delivered, local schools, training providers. and it's 80% classroom based and 20% work placement. Now that is quite important. So it's very much a classroom based T-level qualification, but within that, of course, is practical, obviously hand skills that they need to be taught. And then, as you can see there, which I've already mentioned about the industry placement, and that's where they can gain some experience, apply any previous knowledge, the knowledge that they've gained from the T-level to that date, and develop their attitude and behaviours in towards developing, particularly on the practical skills side. And then you've got apprentices, of course, as you know, and so you've got level 2s and level 3s, and as you know, there must be a minimum of 12 months. But again, you'll notice it's 80% on the job and 20% off the job. So basically, what you have with T-levels is a reversal of apprenticeships. So you've got 80% in the classroom and 20% out on the job, if you like, for T-levels, and for apprentices, it's the reverse. You're 80% on the job and 20% in a college, typically, for example. In either case, when you've completed the apprenticeship and when you complete the T-level or indeed the A-level route, then where do you go? Well, obviously higher education, you can go into that skilled employment, the sector that you've particularly focused on. You could progress into an apprenticeship, again, within the chosen field that you've decided to apply your T-level occupational specialism in. So if you've gone for brick, then you bricklaying apprentice, and plumbing, plumbing, you'd be looking at a plumbing apprentice. Or again, you could, as you can see on the far right, maybe look at a higher degree type of apprenticeship if you want to move into maybe that management type area, rather than the hand skills, if you like. So just a little bit more about the differences between the T-level and the apprenticeship, because it's always kind of compared with that. So the T-level and the apprenticeship is based on the same kind of employee design standards, but it's designed to suit different kind of learning styles. So as I said, with T-levels, 80% is with a provider. So the apprentice, as you know, is paid work, and it's suitable for learners who kind of know that's what I want to be. I want to be a plumber, I want to be an electrician, I want to be a painter, whatever it is, and they pursue and get an apprenticeship. So the training on the job effectively. Whereas a T-level is largely classroom based, as I said, with that substantial kind of industrial placement there. So there's a significant difference, as you can see there. Now, T-levels do have a broader course content, and then you've got their specialism as the occupational specialism that you then kind of focus on. Whereas the apprenticeship is more narrow or more focused on a specific occupation from the very beginning of the apprenticeship. Now, the government see the T-levels as the new gold standard in the technical education world, typically for your full-time learners as such. And as you know, come September 2024, then for level 3 in the trade areas that we're discussing today, the only option at level 3 available will be the T-levels, and that's in September 2024. It would have been September 2023, but the government allowed a little bit of slippage. It's now a year later, so it's September 2024. Level 3 in the areas we're discussing today can only be done through a T-level route, and that's through Sitting Guilds and EAL. So just to kind of give you that broader picture, I've already mentioned about the design, surveying and planning, that the kind of wave 1, which persons manage and have developed. And from that, as I already mentioned, the fact that they help develop the core, which goes across all the construction and building services T-levels. So wave 2 was construction. Then you can see there that you've got other organisations, AOs, that have bidded and won to develop the T-levels in childcare, digital, health and science, as you can see there, and you've got the delivery start dates there. So the T-levels are not just going to hook on to and hang into just construction and the construction sector. It goes across all the sectors, or most of the sectors, and you can see there Sitting Guilds managed to win, and they're in the process of developing the T-level for engineering and manufacturing. And you can see their business admin, and then you can see the ones that are coming up, hair and beauty and catering, etc. So you can see that for yourself. So there is this rollout program, if you like, which will encapsulate and capture other sectors So effectively at level 3 in these areas, in these sectors, it will just be the T-level opportunity for learners. So just to kind of reinforce, I guess, the main bulk and content of the T-level. So it is over 2 years. And as you can see there, you've got the technical qualification. The TQ was, like I said before, that people refer to. So you've got the core, which we've previously mentioned. So that's exam-based, and there's an employer set project there. So very knowledge-based, covering a range of different subject matter. And then you've got your occupational specialism, which is the practical, if you like, be whether it's plumbing, electrical, or brickwork, whatever it may be. You've got your maths and English, and the IT has already previously mentioned, and any other requirements that have been identified as being required. So that's 8%. The TQ covers 8% of the T-level activity, if you like, and there's a maximum of 1,400 hours there. But it does vary between on-site and building services in terms of the number of hours allocated to the core, and within that core, how many hours are allocated to the occupational specialisms. And then you've got the remaining 20% is the industry placement that I previously talked about. So again, about applying their knowledge and skills that they've learned on the T-level, applying it in a practical context, and hopefully contributing, in the workplace in an active way. And as you can see there, as we said earlier, 350 hours on average. So that's the kind of a summary, if you like, of the T-level course. Now, in terms of construction and building services, I just thought I would just, while I've introduced my colleagues at the beginning, I would just put some pictures to the name, so to speak. So you can see me on the top left. I may well have met one or two of you. I've got my mobile there, my email. And then as we move across, we've got Mark, who EQA managed for EAL. And again, you've got his mobile number there and email. And then on the bottom left, Rob. We've got Rob, who's the technical advisor for building services. So you've got his telephone number and his email address. And then we've got Alison Whittle, who's not on this call today, but Alan Whittle is our technical advisor for post-16 education. So she does get involved in some of the webinars and Teams meetings that we do have with centres. So you may well come across there. So I thought I would just kind of mention that. And we will be having a new industry manager covering T-levels for construction and building services joining us later in this month. So there'll be another person I can introduce you to later on. So you've got our contact details there. So hopefully you'll be able to, when you get these slides, you'll have that information. And I did mention to you previously that the T-levels are not being developed in isolation. It's not an awarding body looking at the spec and thinking this is what we think is appropriate. It was about very much working with providers and employers and associations, institute, I've got the NFB there, for example, and institutes and organisations that represent the trade areas that are covered within the T-level for on-site for building services. So just to kind of give you a bit of an idea of who we've been engaging with as such, and as I said, all that to be signed off, from the employer's perspective and from IFA's perspective to make sure that we was meeting all that criteria I discussed previously. In terms of construction for on-site, you'll be familiar with this, guys, effectively. It's very familiar in terms of you've got the core, as I said. So the core consists of 2 externally exam papers. And then you've got this employer set project. That's a scenario into which the learners on the T-level program respond to a series of questions. So it's the employer set project as such. And then what you've got is the occupational specialism. So in the case of on-site, then the T-level learner will either do carpentry and joinery, plastering, painting and decorating, or bricklaying. So they'll choose one of those routes, only one. They will only do one of those routes. So that's where they'll specialise in those particular occupations. So that's kind of an overview in terms of on-site. So what I'm now going to do is move on to the next slide, which will be Rob, who's going to pick up the remainder of this webinar. And Rob will talk you through the building services once I put the slide up. Over to you, Rob.
Thanks a lot, Paul. Yeah, so as Paul mentioned, there is a core within construction, so there's also a core within building services. Now, a lot of the material within that core is consistent with what's in construction. Actually, there's 11 of the 14 learning outcomes in there, which is consistent with construction, but then there's an extra 3 learning outcomes in the building services core, which is specific to building services. So a slightly larger core in the building services with more guided learning hours allocated. So that's to be considered maybe when planning delivery, etc. More time may need to be allocated for delivery time of the core within BSE. So it's assessed identical to the construction almost. We've got 2 core exams. The exams are externally set and marked by City and Guilds. So it's for those who have delivered technical qualifications before, very similar to technical qualifications. We set the exam, we mark the exam. So there's no marking required for centres. That's on a set date. So exam schedules are set annually. That's published, and attendees need to attend the date of the exam, and then City and Guilds mark those exams. As well as the construction building services have an employer set project as well. Just to give an overview of that, the titles sometimes confusing. We're given these titles. We can't normally set these titles. We have to work with IFA, etc. to discuss things like that. But the employer set project is not something which is done in the workplace. It's not linked to industry placement at all. It's a project which has been written in conjunction with employers. So that hence the title employer set projects. So it's more like an assignment stroke project which is carried out within the centre and is delivered within the centre. It's not something which is done on site. So again, once delivering the core, most centres this year who are delivering have delivered the core obviously in the first year, just bringing in the occupational specialisms to keep learners interested, basically, you know, to give them a bit of an insight into the specialism they're doing. In building services, we've got options. So on the slide on the right, we've got some standalone occupational specialisms, in which we've got protection systems engineering, electrical and electronic equipment engineering, electrotechnical engineering, and gas engineering. So they're standalone. So if you choose one of those, you only have to do one occupational specialism. And then in group B, in the bottom of the slide, we've got some combined occupational specialisms. So we've got specialisms which are paired to each other. So when this first kicked off, when it was first developed, if you like, there was an opportunity for learners to choose, let's say, refrigeration and heating engineering or air conditioning and plumbing, and we sort of fed back and said that can't really work for centres. They need to deliver specialisms which are linked to each other. So they decided then to pair these specialisms up. So if you choose an option from group B, you have to choose one of the 3 combined occupational specialisms. So plumbing and heating, heating and ventilation, or refrigeration air conditioning. So once you've chose your specialism, the assessment within that specialism is an internally marked, externally moderated practical synoptic assignment. So if you choose one of the ones from group A, you'll just have one synoptic assignment to do at the end of, let's say, year 2. And if you choose from group B, you'll actually have 2 separate occupational specialism synoptic assignments. So you'll have, for example, on the left, you'll have a plumbing assignment, synoptic assignment, and a heating synoptic assignment. So that's a very high level overview. If we move to the next slide, apologies, there is sometimes a lag on these when other people are presenting. Thanks, Paul. So just to mention on registration, the registration window does open quite early and close quite early. Learners need to be registered on the core first. Let's say for building services, this would be the 8710-30 on the right of the slide, or from construction, 8711-30 on the left of the slide there. And not until you've registered on the core can you then register on the occupational specialism. So that has to be registered separately. So you register on your specialism separately. And the codes there, I'm not going to read through all the codes. You know, the code, obviously, in building services is a little bit more complex, but you've got on the top there, you've got the standalone occupational specialisms, and then you've also got the paired specialism. So you don't have to register on, let's say, plumbing and heating separately. You just register on that paired specialism or a standalone specialism, and the codes are all there on the slides. But we will be running through some approval webinars, etc., which will explain that in more detail. I have actually dropped a couple of messages in the chat. I'm not sure if people can view the chat. One was a link to where all our webinars are advertised, and one was a link to the next one on from this. So we do see centres, obviously it's early in the year, and we have to go over some of this stuff again a little bit in the next one. We do see more attendance in the next one as well, because centres have probably progressed a little bit more in the academic year. So that's just a little bit on registrations. If we move on. And now we're going to talk a little bit more about industry placement. So obviously this is a hot topic, industry placement, something very different. If you delivered it, our technicals before, you may have touched the toes in the water almost on this with regards to employer involvement in qualifications, etc. So it's been a big focus for the various government organisations in the previous years, really working up to this. And now it's took this to the next level, where T-level learners have to actually go on industry placement and do a minimum of 315 hours, or approximately 45 days, but can last longer. So you will need to complete industry placement to actually achieve T-level. So we will provide a certificate for the actual technical qualification, but you won't get your T-level certificate until you've completed all the components Paul went through on that previous slide earlier on in the presentation. So you would need to log all that, industry placement would need to be logged, learner needs to carry out that, and then the Education and Skills Funding Agency, National Apprenticeship Services, are working with employers and providers on industry placement, and that's progressing as we speak. So we're feeding back, you know, how learners have found this in the almost the pilot wave we're going through at the moment, and feeding back on this all the time. So if we go to the next slide, there's a link on the bottom right of this slide which takes you to the gov.uk website. So although we've wrote the technical qualification for the T-level, this is sort of outside our scope. So industry placement is not really in the scope of City and Guilds. So we're supporting centres and talking to them about how to get set up and what industry placement is all about. But really the guidance is on the gov.uk website, and there's a link there on the slide when you get these through. These will come through as a recording as well, and you will get a certificate of attendance for today. So this will all come through usually about 4 hours after the presentation finished, and you should receive an automated email from GoToWebinar with that on. So it's actually time spent working within an organisation, making a meaningful contribution. So the more involved, obviously, that learner is involved in industry placement and actually getting some experience out there in industry, the more they will benefit from that, and the more experience and skills they'll learn, and probably the better job they'll make of that synoptic assignment then at the end of year 2. It's got to be occupational specific, and it's to develop the practical and technical skills. So in the technical qualification in centre, there is practical assessment, you know, a practical activity and a synoptic assessment for the practical skills. But the theory is, you know, they should be developing those practical skills out there on site as well. Obviously, there's issues around, you know, getting learners on site and things like that, and we've got barriers there. But we've got CSCS cards produced for T-level industry placements, which they can access if required to get on site. And this is a mandatory requirement for all learners from September 2020. So it's not something we can sort of skirt around. Just to give you an insight into, you know, how some other centres have addressed this in some of the pilot waves, they've actually employed or allocated T-level responsible people within the organisations who started organising this, and they've been linking things in well with apprenticeships. So I think some of the good idea some centres is they've tried to almost make this T-level industry placement a little bit of a pilot scheme before they take on an apprentice, where they can see if they can build a relationship with learners, maybe take on 2 or 3 T-level industry placements, and then finally choose an apprentice from those 2 or 3 after they've built a relationship, etc. So centres who've done this well have linked this in with their apprenticeship delivery team and used a lot of access to those employers they've already got links with. So it can be block, day release. There's no set scheme, there's no set schedule. It's up to how that can be facilitated within the centre. It could be carried out towards the end of the programme or continually throughout the programme. But I think, you know, the idea is if we can generally build those skills throughout the programme, that's the idea of industry placement, rather than leaving it just as 45 days at the end, perhaps. Maybe not benefit as much from that industry placement using that model. So if we move on to the next one. So a few tips for providers when we're looking for an industry placement. You know, there has got to be some requirements there for employers. They've got to offer a safe working environment, incorporate an induction. The tasks and work they're carrying out on that placement have got to be relevant to the actual specialism almost. Any equipment, resources required have all got to be provided by the employer. And there's got to be a mentor or supervisor which can support that student, a named person who can be allocated a mentor almost. There's got to be a review procedure in place for both the learner and provider. So that all the information around that is on that gov.uk website. So any centres just looking into industry placement at the moment, all the guidelines are on there, what they should be carrying out while they're on their industry placement, what needs to be documented, how that's managed. All the information is on that gov.uk website. So we can move on. And we're now going to look at some of the support materials. So when we went through the pilot scheme, the books were a little late, but they are published now. So what you'll see is there's a lot of new material in this core. We needed a lot of support for centres within the core. So we've partnered with Hodder Education to write 2 dedicated books for on-site construction and building services engineering. So the details of the books are on the slide there, which you'll get through, costs, etc. They're also producing ebooks. So you can have either a whiteboard purchase, which you can purchase as a centre if you wanted to teach from the books, let's say on screen. Ebooks, which tutors and learners can access. They can be marked up for revision, for key points. And there's some really good key things in these books. I've got to say, I really like the books because it helps adapt delivery style. So for instance, there's little snippets in the books where it's getting them to go away and research, let's say. It's using the verbs we need to use in delivery, which we're going to be supporting you with along the journey of these webinars. But it's all about adapting those delivery styles to suit that type of exam question they're going to have to do. So they have to go away and maybe analyse something at a various section of the book. There's key terms in the books to get them used to the terminology within some of these new qualifications. There's a lot of good support material in there which can help adapt delivery. There's a link on there to the Hodder T-level webpage, and on there, if you scroll down to the bottom of that link, there's also mapping grids to the current trade area books, let's say. So in your trade areas, for instance, plumbing and electrical, I believe brick, etc., Hodder have written books to support those qualifications. And what they've done, they've actually mapped the content of those trade area books, which you might already hold or already be using, to identify which sections of those books need to be taught for T-level. So you've got a book to support the core, and the current trade area books then support the occupational specialism. So it might be worth a look. On that T-level webpage there from Hodder, you can request things like sample chapters. You can discuss costs on there if you want to buy bulk. There's various aspects on there, different purchasing methods for things like the ebooks, etc., and the whiteboard subscriptions you can use for your colleges. So you'll get that link through when you get the recording through and the slides, etc. So if we look at the next slide, we've also got some free resources. So there's a link there on the City and Guilds webpage. I'm going to actually drop that link in the chat as well when I've just finished presenting and we're waiting for questions, because it might be something to give you an idea of the content of the core, which is very new. It might give you an idea of some of the delivery requirements and what's actually in that core. Obviously, you've got the qualification handbook, which is on the website, but we'll give, by looking at some of the dedicated support material, might give you an idea of the level of delivery required for some of those new topics. That core is very new. The only way I can probably describe it, it's like a construction level 3 diploma bolted on to the occupational specialism. So it goes into a lot more depth with regards to the construction management side of things, the science side of things. It's a lot more in depth than we would normally see within our, let's say, traditional VRQ, MVQ type qualifications. So on that link as well, you can see links to all the industry boards, there's e-bulletins, there's dedicated technical advisor qualification, contact details if you need them as well. So there's a lot of free resources. If you look at the little snip there on the screen, that's just our City and Guilds homepage. And if you hover over the T-Levels tab, that takes you to that section of the qualification support material as well. But I'll drop that in the chat once I've just done the next couple of slides. So if we move on, that's more or less it for today's presentation. We're going to drop in to see if we've got any questions now. And I'm also going to drop in the chat the link to our survey, which you can provide us a little bit of feedback on the type of support you might need moving forward. We'll give it a couple of minutes. We'll see if we've got any questions, and we'll then wrap up and close. Thanks a lot for listening today.
Thanks for that, Rob. Just questions come up about the registration window. I appreciate, obviously, centres on this call, and it won't be started till September 2023. But for this year, it's the registration windows for the TQ is from the 1st of September to the 1st of November, because Rob previously mentioned about this window that opens up, and it's quite a tight window. So that's the dates that apply to this particular academic year. But as I said, for you guys on the call, it won't affect you. But it'll be similar kind of dating, similar type of time frame, if you like, for when you hopefully register come September 2023 with your learners. Yes, you will get the slides. You will get a copy of the slides after the event, and as Rob already mentioned, you also get a CPD certificate as well. So those will come out to you automatically, so no problem with that. It's the kind of question we always get asked, and of course that's what we always send you is the slides, but you'll also get the link to the recording. So if you want to re-watch this recording, then you can at your leisure. All I would say is when you do actually re-look at the recording, it's when you register, it starts straight away. So it's not something you kind of register, put your name, your details in, and then think, well, I'll have a look at it in an hour's time. It actually starts straight away. And I mention that because it might be that you forward on this information to one of your colleagues who've not been able to attend this session, for them to actually look at the recording and to look at the slides. So again, it's just worth mentioning that it will automatically start as soon as you register your desire, if you like, to actually look at the recording. So that will be the link that we'll send you. And yes, as I mentioned earlier, it's a good question. There are going to be some forthcoming webinars. I meant there's probably around about half a dozen or so remote support webinars, if you like, or Teams meetings. So as I previously mentioned to you, webinars are great to, what we've just covered, and giving that information is an opportunity for you to ask questions. But hopefully after you've been able to absorb this particular webinar, then in your mind there might be formulating some questions when you've perhaps had a look at some of the material that we've got that we previously mentioned. So that then when we come to a Teams meeting, that's where we can interact with one another. So you can speak freely, we can speak freely to one another, and you can ask those questions. No question is a silly question, by the way, and it's be more interactive. So that's why we kind of have this mix between, I'll call it a formal webinar like today, and then we've got a Teams meetings, which is more of an informal type of chat type approach, if you like, where there'll be a number of colleagues from Sitting Guilds and DAL on that call in order to be able to respond to those specific questions. And we always take that opportunity in the Teams meetings to give you some further information. So this year for the pre-delivery centres like yourselves, it's very much about, over the course of the academic year, giving you bits of information to build you up to that point where you've got some confidence in preparing, if you like, for your first delivery in September 2023. I think that's probably all the questions answered, unless I'm missing anybody. I'm not sure if any colleagues have picked up any that I can't see.
I've just dropped the survey in the chat, Paul. What I'll also do, obviously you'll get our contact details on the recording with the slides, but I'm just going to drop my email in the chat there. If anybody does want a copy of the slides, you know, urgently because for a certain meeting or whatever, or to discuss with other colleagues, just drop me an email on robert.malinder@cityandguilds.com, and I'll just you know, drop you an email back with the presentation on. The survey link is also just for you to tell us what you want as well with regards to support. We are doing a lot of Teams meetings and things, as Paul said. We're also looking to potentially put on some face-to-face stuff where we can bring centres together who we're already delivering, along with centres who are potentially not delivering just yet or looking to deliver next year. So that is all on the link I put on earlier in the chat. The link to all future events are on there, so you should be able to find them all okay. The first link I put on at 12:20 will take you to all our future events, so you can register on those. But no, I can't see any more questions, Paul. We don't take up any unnecessary time.
Okay. Yeah, right. Thank you for that. Right. Okay. So what I'll do is just thank you all for attending this webinar. Hopefully you found it useful. You've got our contact details if you need to correspond with any of us. So just to say thank you very much, and have a good rest of the afternoon. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. See everybody. See you on the networking events.
Bye.
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 Oh, bye.